Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Pete Nelson with Mathnasium of Northborough. Thank you so much for joining me again today for another Lunch and Learn. We're going to have a great time today. Believe it or not, we're going to be working with fractions, and it's going to be so much fun because I'm going to teach you a little known secret that's part of the Mathnasium method that really applies not just to how we work with fractions, but it's a great way to think about things when things seem complicated in math, even all the way up through algebra. So I'm going to walk you through the example of how we add fractions first, but then I want to tie it all together and talk with you a little bit about how that can even help us with more advanced concepts all the way up through algebra. So today's problem of the day is, what is 1/2 plus 1/4? So I chose a fairly simple example for adding fractions. You could probably do this in your head, some of you I'm sure, but I wanted to illustrate how we can use this same concept no matter how difficult the fractions are. So one of the things that's really tough for students to do when adding or subtracting fractions is what to do about getting them to be with what's called a common denominator. Now here at Mathnasium, we have this great concept that we call the law of sameness. And the law of sameness applies not just with fractions, but in a lot of areas of math, just like algebra that we talked with. So I'm going to put the fractions down for just a minute. Before we talk about adding halves and quarters, we want to talk about how we can add or subtract anything in life. So for example, if you had 3 apples and 2 bananas, how could you add those together? Could you do it? If you did that, how do you think about being able to do that? You actually had to change apples and bananas into fruit in order to be able to add them, and then it's easy. So 3 apples and 2 bananas, or 2 apples and 3 bananas, I forget which I said, but if you add them all up together, you get out to be 5 fruit. You don't get 5 apples. So you have to be able to make sure that you're sort of translating or changing things so that they are the same, so that now you can add and subtract them. So same thing with coins, for example. If we have 2 nickels and 5 pennies, we can't add them up together and get 7 pickles. We have to add them as coins. We can add them as 7 coins. Or another way we could do that is we could have them change into cents. So if we have those 2 nickels and 5 pennies, 2 nickels is 10 cents, 5 pennies is 5 cents. We add those together, that's 15 cents. So see how that works? We can add or subtract things, anything, as long as they're the same. If they're not the same, you can't do it. So that applies all the way up through even in algebra. If you have x plus y, you cannot add those together. They have to be the same thing. So back to the law of sameness and how we work with fractions. This is where it makes it a lot easier, because if you think of now, the bottom number in the fraction we all know is called the denominator. A nice way to remember this is denominator is the name of the fraction. So the name of each fraction is a much simpler way to think about it. This first fraction is 1/2. Its name is halves. The top number, or the numerator, tells us how many of that thing do we have. So we actually have 1/2. Because the half is the name of the fraction, and the 1 on top, the numerator, tells us how many of that we have. Same thing with the quarters. It's got a different name right now, quarter or a fourth, but we know we have 1 of them. So we want to use that law of sameness and get these to be the same type of number, same thing, so that now we can add them up together. So another concept we use here at Mathnasium is what's called scaffolding. That's a fancy word for making sure that we've got all the basic skills in place before we go forward with tougher things like adding up fractions. So first of all, I want to be able to make sure that I can name these in the same way. So real quickly, I think a really helpful thing to be able to do this is to just draw pictures. So half of something. Well, if we have half of a pizza, there's a small little pizza or a cookie. If I want to cut that in half, we can do that, and this is the half that I'm talking about. Okay, let's do that with our quarters too. Sometimes pictures are a really helpful way to get our concept across, and we use those a lot. What if we had a quarter of a pizza or a cookie? What does that look like? Well, first I divide it in half, and then I divide the half in half. Now I've got 4 equal pieces. Those are quarters or fourths. So I'm going to take, visually, this is what I'm working with. I have 1/2 of a pizza over here and 1/4 of a pizza over here. Now, if I added those together, how many quarters would I have? Well, I know I've got 1/4 here, but how many quarters are in a half? Well, we saw I could cut a half in half and get a quarter. If I drew that same type of a line here, going across, I have 2 quarters over here. So this gets into equivalent fractions, which is another basic skill that we want to make sure everybody's pretty solid on. But now I could rename a half, just like we named bananas and apples to fruit, I'm going to rename a half as how many quarters do I have? I have 1, 2 quarters. So now I have 2 quarters plus 1 quarter. And now it's pretty easy because they're the same thing. They're all quarters or fourths. So if I add them together, I just have to know 2 plus 1 is 3. And then the name of the fraction is quarters or fourths. So this is a real quick example of how we can use Mathnasium's law of sameness, starting with even elementary and middle school math, dealing with fractions, dealing with things that aren't the same so that we can start to add them together. But when we get into algebra, combining like terms, working with different variables, that same concept is still there. And this is one of the things that I love about how Mathnasium teaches math, is that it takes the mystery out of a lot of things and really shows everyone how there's underlying concepts that tie it all together. So what we do here at Mathnasium is I'm happy to do Facebook Lives every Wednesday. I think it's going great. Leave me your comments here today, of course. I definitely will go back and check them and respond to all of them. I think it's really important to hear from you as well about future struggles or future problems that you might be struggling with at home with your child right now. I'd love to help out and kind of walk you through how does Mathnasium think about that. We do this every day, Monday through Thursday and Sundays, online in the afternoons. We do it with personalized, customized instructions. So it's not too hard and not too easy for any of our students. They're getting exactly the help that they need from our kid-friendly instructors and our wonderful Mathnasium materials. So definitely check us out. It's called Mathnasium at Home. My name is Pete Nelson. I'm the owner of Mathnasium of Northborough. Hope you had a great day today and hope this made it a little bit brighter. Feel free to reach out to me anytime if I can help you and your students out with math. Have a great day, and I'll be back next week, and tell me some problems that you want to see. Thanks so much. Bye-bye now.